Hello, everyone. I'm doing another ad hoc because these things help me work through my thinking. So why people go to therapy is so you can talk things through. Because there's a difference between the act of thinking, writing, and speaking. When you're thinking, you tend to make all sorts of nonsense, let all sorts of nonsense ideas survive in your head. When you are writing, very few of them survive. But when you're talking to other people, there's more of presumptive feedback. In other words, it's easier to imagine you're being corrected by the audience or the people your interlocutors. So sometimes I want to just talk things through because it helps me work it out. And in technical things, it doesn't matter. But in anything that's emotionally loaded, especially anything that's loaded with my emotions, I find that I have to work my way up to talking it through because that's the only way I can sort of get through. In other words, I can confront what it is, the emotions that I'm wrestling with. So this is sort of another point where I've come to on religion. And it's sciencing religion is one thing, but talking about it, in other words, writing the law about what constitutes, writing the science of religion, and then writing into law what constitutes a truthful and non-truthful religion is something quite a bit more difficult. But the real challenge, of course, is that I started out with this with a long distaste for the gossiping, rallying, shaming, ridiculing, moralizing, denial and evasion of argument by the left. Their use of suggestion and deceit and false promise and evasion of the laws of the universe. I mean, that's all great. And then I got to the point where I understand this is just an adaptation of the modern adaptation of the Abrahamic religion, which is just an institutionalization of the female strategy. And so what's been happening is that I've worked my way through that. I get to the basis of religion, fine. And I get to the basis of the Abrahamic religions and how they advance the female strategy. But, so that's like the anchor point one. I'm trying to provide some context. To provide an analogy, when I got involved in libertarianism, I mean, I was a classical liberal. I didn't pay much attention to libertarians until I heard some speeches by Hoppe where I understood he had scienced the bridge between law and social science. This is all his. Now, I've had this discussion with various professors, and they argue that the one I'm thinking of in particular, George Mason University, who doesn't like me very much anymore either. So I said, he said, that's really a Rothbard thing. I'm like, well, maybe it's a Rothbard thing, but it's not true. It's wrong in Rothbard and it's right in Hoppe. So why is that? And that dissonance sort of affected me. So I went through the Rothbard thing, and in doing so, finding that dissonance between my Anglo understanding of law and morality, and Hoppe's German understanding of law and morality, and Rothbard's Jewish understanding, or Ashkenazi Jewish understanding of law and morality. That dissonance between those three is what let me understand what was wrong, right? I mean, Hayek goes along and he basically can't quite get it from philosophy to science or to logic. Hoppe essentially manages to get it to logic, and I managed to get it from logic to science. So, but in doing that, it made me very angry. I got very angry with Rothbard and Mises and Rand and the Jewish movement. And of course, this expanded to my understanding of what the Marxists had done, what the neo-Marxists had done, what the postmodernists has done, and how they just keep reforming the big lie into, PC woke, anti-Western, anti-white male, because of course white males are the ultimate expression of the masculine hyper-adaptive reproductive strategy. So I get it, but the problem was I have a lot of emotion tied up in this. I have emotion tied up in what's been done to my people, what's been done to my country, what's been done to our laws, what's been done to our Constitution, this war against our civilization from within. That's what people are angry about. They're angry that our law and our institutions and our culture are open-ended, so that they allow the warfare against our institutions of cultural production by the female means of antisocial behavior, which can be institutionalized and turned into a method of cultural warfare. They destroy information and cooperation and all the cohesion with the false promise that there's another way other than the laws of the universe. So I was very angry. So, if you look at what Brad's really been doing, is he's just trying to beat me like it's like going to a therapist, and he's just as relentless as a therapist, and he's trying to get me to not only not name names, but to get rid of my anger and blame. And I said, well, I probably can get rid of my anger and blame, and I can leave it with responsibility. And with responsibility, I can find a cure, a cure. In other words, it's just as easy to end the institutionalization of female antisocial behavior as a method of cultural warfare as it is to legally suppress the male antisocial behavior of force and violence as from an antisocial behavior into warfare. Now, there's a slight difference, is that it's pretty useful to use military warfare or female cultural warfare against enemies, but you don't let enemies bring it inside and then tolerate it, which is what we've sort of done. What's happened is I've been struggling with working through the emotional catharsis of getting through from rage, really, to anger, to frustration, to blame, to saying, well, we're all just monkeys flinging nonsense, around, verbal feces around. Conducting warfare by other means. We're always at war. We just turn it to productive ends most of the time. And those particular apes from that part of those, apes, I mean that in the sense of we're an ape, right? Great apes. That particular set of great apes from the Middle East had a set of problems, and you can understand their problems. In other words, how are they trying to solve their environmental problem during the age of transformation, which is just a reaction to the, excuse me, I pushed the chair there, just a reaction to the Indo-European expansion and our invention of realism, naturalism, paternalism, and military order, which was far more successful than the Semitic priestly order, with a constantly rotating aristocracy. So you had this incredible set of thought come out of the Indo-European expansion, and it's really not very good for the social order of the Middle East. So you can understand why they would try to find some way around it. And what got me there was there's finally enough non-bullshit research coming out of, it's actually coming out of Indian Muslims from India, into the history of the evolution of Islam as really seeing the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran as just a collection of wisdom sayings of time. The three books diverging into three different factions because of three differences in law, where those three differences in law were necessary. In other words, the wisdom literature is only as valuable as it persists the system of law that persists the group evolutionary strategy. So the net result is, why am I angry at women acting like, women act like women. Do you think we're ever going to stop women from acting like women or pretend? I mean, women live under the illusion that they're, that we're not that different, I think, sometimes, or they think we're stupid, but of course it's reciprocal. We think they're stupid and they think we're stupid, but it's just a division of cognitive, of the sensory perception, cognitive memory, order, etc., which is useful for the maximizing the computation of opportunity and therefore subsequent adaptation. I mean, that's what humans do. We master the art of adaptation. We do it faster than all other creatures combined. So, because we don't have to do any physical or genetic adaptation in order to adapt anymore. We just need to learn. So this is dramatically cheapifies, even though our brains are expensive, that process. So anyway, I mean, why do I need to be angry? Because, it's like fear is the mind killer. Well, anger is just equally a mind killer. It prevents you from seeing solutions. So this is sort of a way of saying that, I finally did this piece with Brad, and he's at a level where he can, he's able to understand my counter arguments and my eradication of it. But, the problem is I'm still operating under this myth of equality, right? I mean, and somebody has to be in charge, and we can't let them be in charge. It's not any more complicated than that. We don't need to ask permission to prevent people from engaging in warfare, despite that they believe it's an intrinsic good, but what it really is just their instinct to not have their children left behind or have them be left behind, because they're at the unfortunate axis, one of the unfortunate axes of the genetic distribution. Whether that be the hyperfeminine, in other words, the non-rational, sufficiently possessed a female value of empathy over reason to choose empathy over reason. And if they're there, fine, and there's just, and the same thing has to do with empathy over reason. The same thing has to do with what are the two axes I was going for? Empathy over reason. Oh, intelligence over instinct, or reason over instinct. I'm forgetting one. I want to put them in there. Like I just went down the rabbit hole too far, and I can't climb back out without help. But anyway, Brad and I were walking through this, and I'm like, well, why do we expect women to change? Well, they're not going to. Well, why do women expect men to change? We're not going to. We evolved to be this way, to divide the labor and to find compromises, which is the only way of calculating a stable relation between the two relative extremes, when the sex is the relative extreme possible for any cooperative organization, cooperative organism, and it's just a research and develop. It's just universe maximizing its research and development project in us. So what am I? I tend to weave these stories maybe a little too in too much detail, but the result is that why do we need to be angry? We really don't. It's more important to say, why do I need to be angry? Well, I don't need to be angry. I don't need to be angry. We don't need to be angry to them, because they're just bots. They're less bot than we are, but we're less bot than they are for the same reason they're more bot than we are. It's just a division of time. Because the male sensitivity has to be territorially and spatially aware, and the political, and the female orientation has to be to her hyperextension of her nervous system to cover children, and the other women that cooperate her, that ensure her against variability. So, it's perfectly fine. And why do women work the way they do? Because seduction is simply the cheapest way of rallying human animals. It's just cheap, right? And so what? Seduction is really good for them because they don't really have to pay off. So it's sort of like advertising, marketing, gambling, load sharking. Is it, of course, that the enemy would specialize in those things, because that's what the female specializes in, is understanding how to bait into hazard and capture the returns. It's just seduction. So why be mad? Why be angry? I just don't. It's just, Brad's beating on me. He's right. To to tell the each civilization what error they're making because of their past is just to tell them, well, you grew up in this place and you have those habits, but now that you know science, you don't have to do that anymore. Well, but that doesn't mean women are going to change. It doesn't mean cognitively female people are going to change. It just means that we're going to have to put into law those things that limit their antisocial behavior. In other words, what they think of as good is destruction of commons, and what we think of as good, which is a lot of aggression and dominance signaling, posturing. Well, we got to direct that to the production of commons and prohibit that too. So I don't really need to be angry. The problem is that they make me angry so often. I have so much built up anger that it's hard to overcome it. It's hard to stay mindful, hard to stay in peace of mind. So, and that comes to where people who follow me a long time confuse the difference between the research program, in other words, the way I conduct research on people by involuntarily treating them as lab rats, all right, through this King of the Hill game. I treat them that way because it's the only way to get a truthful expression out of them, because we're not capable of stating what's true under any other circumstance. We just can't. It's just normal human animal behavior to signal. So, and we can't control it. We're not able to compartmentalize that much. So we just go through that. They think that they see that. Then they see all this logic I work on and the grammars and the analytical prep and the operational language and all this other stuff. And then they see the formal construction of law and this incredibly wordy way I teach how to make arguments, which is just to put them in a physical. Economics is just physics with memory. So I just put it in terms of physics, which is we think of as economic terms. And we eliminate all the gobbledygook, the signaling and virtuing and all this other crap that surrounds it. In other words, the posturing and promoting and deceit. And we just put that all around it. And people see that and they think that's the goal. No, the goal isn't, you don't have to master this stuff. It's just like for super geeks, and like not everybody has to be a lawyer to get the protection of a court. Our civilization, not everyone has to be a constitutional scholar in order to count on the Supreme Court to do it. We don't all have to know these things. All you got to know is that there's a reason the West succeeded. You can state that in a paragraph, not much longer than the preamble to the Constitution. And you can formalize that as a system of laws. And in doing so, you can equally suppress the female method of warfare, just like we've equally suppressed the male method of warfare. And once that method of warfare, whether violence or undermining, female undermining, or male violence or female undermining, once that's been suppressed, you've basically directed all that energy to the production of commons. Now, men and women may prefer different commons, and so we need different houses so that we can conduct trades between the sexes at political scale, if that's what you want. I know some of us think barefoot and pregnant type of thing. That's not me. And maybe it's one family, one vote. I don't know, but the point is that we can equally suppress the enemy's method of warfare because it's just training another fucking domesticated animal, just like we trained ourselves. The difference is men are more dangerous, so you put more investment in suppressing that. And now we've reached a point of wealth where we've unfortunately licensed the female method of antisocial behavior and its institutionalization as a method of warfare by a hostile enemy we've let among us, and we've let that loose. Well, we can outlaw that too. It's just really easy. So the only problem we have is creating a moral case for the suppression of their deceit. Now, we can do that a lot of ways. But people only need to understand that little bit. That's all they need to understand, those few changes to the law. And the rest of it's just, here's how we unscrew everybody that's been screwed by the media, finance, advertising, academy, state process that's turned into the greatest extraction of capital since the idea of funding cathedrals was invented. The difference is cathedrals, like monuments, produce lasting, durable returns. Hyperconsumption of producing dysgenia as an outcome, produces just the freaking opposite by orders of magnitude. So, this is a sort of, I think I've made my point here, but it's sort of a way for me to sort of work through that. Don't need to be angry. We just need to be responsible. In other words, you're not talking about people who can engage in reciprocity with you. They're not able. What do you do with children or domesticated animals or anything else that can't engage in reciprocity with you? Well, you domesticate it. You limit its choices. If we need to go back to limiting their choices. Now, we might limit their choices just by separating from them, or we might limit their choices by limiting their choices because in other words, we can protect ourselves, we can protect our civilization, or we can protect mankind. And so that's the sort of end of it. And its effect on religion is such that I just posted something earlier that we made on the 2nd, so 2 days ago, which is includes a lot of information about, well, what is Christianity really doing? Well, it's just fulfilling the female instinct. But that female instinct in Christianity is just as valuable, a hyper expression of the female, as our warrior aristocracy is a hyper expression of the male, as our natural law is a hyper expression of the optimum means of cooperation between whatever distribution we manage. So we've talked about, I keep saying, why did we adapt faster? Because we maximized the opportunity for all three possible dimensions of coercion, and therefore minimized and limited us to producing the most beneficial returns for all. So evolutionary terms, the West just invented faster adaptation than the rest, and it's probably due to an increase in IQ, but it's not just an increase in IQ. It's an increase in IQ. It's an increase in neotonic development. It's that increase in neotonic development didn't come at the cost of morphological differences. What am I thinking of? The differences, reducing the differences between the sexes has happened in East Asia. And one of the most important things is we seem to be producing more autism, which is, of course, where all the innovative creativity results, because for obvious reasons, autists like me, we just compute on a narrow set of problems, producing more information with less distraction, and have almost zero motivation to do anything except pursue the truth, because we're not informed by a desire for consensus. Since we're not informed by a desire for consensus, we just calculate what's true because it's the only decidability left for us. So, in some sense, we're just a distribution of mechanical distributions. That's it. And some of us are dividing up the time of this little bit of time here today, and over the next 5 minutes, over the next day, over the next week, or whatever. And some of us, like me, think about, and basically conservative men, we think about civilization. We think about eons. Well, because that's our group revolutionary structure. So it's just a computational division of labor, just like everything in here is just X number of million hypercolumns, or whatever you want to call it, columns, neurocolumns, not just neurons, but columns of neurons. Each one of them is basically a little supercomputer that divides the labor. And that's why we're so fast, is parallel processing across millions of these little supercomputers that will run on just 80 watts. It's fucking amazing, really. So anyway, so how did I get, what points was I trying to get across here? That I'm still in the process of catharsis, trying to not be angry. I hope to, by saying this out loud, to give myself the ambition to be less angry in the future, although I'm not sure I can do it. I'm going to try hard. To continue to eliminate blame, but that doesn't mean eliminating responsibility and causality. In other words, just because the enemy is, evolved in a certain circumstance with certain genetic intuitions that happen to be an expression of the female method of warfare. Well, that happened to be an evolutionary pressure that resulted for them, and they've happened to master it probably mostly by breeding with Europeans. So they captured the female genes and captured the female method of excellence on the European side, because most of this migration was through males capturing local females and then inbreeding. So you can't reason with a thing that can't be reasoned with. You can't engage in reciprocity with a thing that can't engage in reciprocity. This is just what we're dealing with. They don't know that they're dysgenic, devolutionary, and harmful, hyperconsumptive, and burning the world's resources down in a downward redistribution of reproduction to the unfit. They just can't imagine it, except that the evidence is around us at all scales across the world. So you don't ask permission. You just take responsibility. You don't ask the market that includes those people to satisfy you. You just take responsibility for it. There's only one way for men to take responsibility, because there's only one way to defeat irreciprocity and deceit and dysgenia. You have to compel it. So that was my first point. My second was to acknowledge that Dr. Brad's therapy is somehow working on me. And the third part was that, I've done the best I can with Christianity. I can't do any better. I've scienced it, scienced religion, scienced Christianity, scienced the West, and frankly, scienced every other civilization's group evolutionary strategy. I'm still having a little trouble with India. And the answers are really quite simple. And so the problem is that you can provide a true religion, which is humanism. We're very close to humanism, but devoid of its pseudoscientific restatement of Christianity. Humanism is just more philosophies, a bridge between religion and science. Well, humanism is just this kind of bridge. And that's really all it is. And the problem is we now need to bridge humanism. And in order to do that, we need to explain that in order for our civilization to work, for the extreme of Christianity to work, you must maintain the extreme of the martial order. Because the martial order, in other words, where everyone has duty, regardless of rank, and has status in exchange for their duty, that this produces this combination is the only way to tolerate the universal, continuous, never-ending demand for continuous recursive disambiguation of the universe and our continuous evolution in it, so that we defeat the Red Queen, because she doesn't stop. There is no steady state. The universe was never static or cyclical. It's just that people were too stupid and ignorant to be able to know that it was. So, in other words, I'm going back to my original point. The science is obvious that the British invented the modern state, and the Americans tried, not only the Americans, but some of the English, tried to codify the law as the science of human cooperation. And the Americans tried, but failed. They failed not badly, but they failed. And that all we're doing is completing this process, is the evolution of the modern state from that calculates at small scale to calculating at larger scale. So bring back aristocracy, bring back military service, and then you get whether you've got Christianity of faith, Christianity of humanism, or what I would say the Christianity of science, which is what I sort of at, then I think that you've got the ideal society. And I don't think there's a counter argument. I mean, I know there isn't. The only argument is we want to pay the cost of dysgenia and export it onto you guys. Okay, fine. I'll tell you what, you go pay the cost of dysgenia, export it onto your environment, and we'll pay the cost of eugenia, and we'll reap the benefits, because in the end, that's all it is. It's demographics and genetics. That's it. There's nothing else. This is a computation. Demographics, genetics, and culture. And what do you get of culture? How far do you deviate from the laws of nature? Europeans deviated from the least. we maintained tri-functionalism, and everybody else failed with a monopoly frame. And so that tri-functionalism maximizes computation. What is that tri-functionalism? The maximization of the female and what we consider the Christian love, the maximization of the male and the maximization of martial duty, and the maximization of the law is the means of calculating the compromise between the two. That's it. And it's just, there's no other way. I mean, the universe works by that principle. It doesn't matter if you're talking about down where quarks are, even if quarks exist, or if you're dealing with molecules, or you're dealing with organelles, or it's just the same process that happens. Is there's an equilibrium. There's the two extremes provide a scope of inquiry on the universe that can only be resolved by a discovery of a stable relation that doesn't cause collapse by the expenditure of all energy into one extreme. So it's just the discovery of continuous hierarchy of stable relations. That's what evolution consists of. So, I mean, in that end, we're sort of done, right? I mean, we're done, but we have to figure out now how to. Brad keeps saying to me, you can't lose these Christians. And I'm like, I can't lie. I mean, that's the whole point. Either Christians can reform, or we have to satisfy the needs of the vast majority who are now becoming secular Christians. In other words, they want whatever this moral tool is. They're not too fond of this Marxist pomo whatever, and that they would happily get into this humanism thing and happily embrace the ancient traditions if they just knew that there was a reason to justify it. Well, I mean, that's the reason we have it. I just don't know how we went. Do I know how to win that argument other than by compelling? I just don't. But it means we're sort of at the end of the journey, and I'm not really trying to be angry at Christians any more than I'm trying to be angry at Jews or Muslims, or never really was angry at women. I just take them for granted. So these people are just animals, and they don't know any better. In other words, animals. I don't mean that. I'm saying the demarcation between human and animal is not speech. It's not empathy and socialization. It's the ability to fully transition from animal to human, which is the ability to make truthful testimonial statements regardless of cost. Anyway, that's the end of my, how many minutes have I been on here? 32 minutes of my 32-minute rant. Sorry, my phones are all going to ring here for a second while my pharmacy tries to tell me to come pick up my prescription. I called them and bothered them. Could you please get it ready early? God damn it. Why does it ring so many times? There we go. All right. So, where are we? If there's any questions here, I'm going to go over to any questions. Smith says, listening to you gives me hope for the future. Well, I mean, you're being demoralized on purpose, right? I mean, watch Yuri's video. I mean, the problem is that, you're only socially demoralized. You're not personally, personally, I'm sure you still have the will. The problem is just organizing it. I mean, it's not like we can't do this. It's just that there's an issue of preparing the market for the pitch, and we've got to prepare the market for the pitch. Simon says, I doubt the intelligence and attention of people if you don't see all the suffering and loss it's caused, are you even human? Well, they don't see that. They don't see the suffering and loss. They are going to do what all people do, which is divert blame to others, because they can't be wrong, because the cost of cognitive and emotional reforming, especially when it's in opposition to your intuitions, when those intuitions are probably genetic in origin, certainly family or tradition in origin. I mean, they're not going to do that. People never do. They double down on morality just like you'll double down on yours. The difference is, in this particular case, the conservatives are right, and that's great. I mean, it's not that progressives were wrong in the Industrial Revolution for trying to ameliorate the stresses that were created by it. It's not that they were wrong. They just created an organization that outlived its it outlived its purpose the same way all government institutions outlive their purpose, the way that all religions outlive their purpose. Yes, it's harder to domesticate women. I don't know if that's true or not. I think the problem is having the courage to pay truth before face to women, and then letting this turn into a court battle. At the simplest, letting it turn into a court battle, because obviously they're using this method right now to purge. They used the COVID to purge the economics of the middle class, and they're using the vaccine as a method to purge conservatives from the workplace. So, all they're doing is giving us an army, right? That's all they're doing. They're just justifying the future. Never. So they know what they're doing. It's George Soros says, I'm going to destroy the United States of America. I think it's the most important thing to do. That way I can exploit everybody like I exported the British and the Russians. It's just fuck. It's like, so some of them know what they're doing. Some of them are useful idiots, and some of them are extreme idiots that are marginally useful. But Simon says, thank you for your work. You're welcome, Simon. It's I'd like to say it's a pleasure. I'm not sure. I think it's become a duty and an obsession, because the cost for me for doing this has gotten kind of out of hand. It's been extremely detrimental. Martin says, stayed late. It sounds like we're bringing back autostocracy. Well, autostocracy is just aristocracy, right? That's just, there's no difference. Yeah, the difference is, where does the autists end up? What you really want, you don't need autists in the monarchy. You need basically a sportsman, a guy who knows how to play sports, right? Because he's like, okay, these are the rules of the fucking game. You're outside of the rule of the game, get out. That's really the level of sophistication in monarchy. That, and just the self-interest of preserving the family status, so that the rest of the family doesn't kill you and replace you with one of your brothers. Not complicated incentive in the monarchy, but the monarchy needs a cabinet, and the cabinet needs intellectuals, and most of all, the people who are like us. It needs judges, and it turns out that very few of us are suited to be judges, and realistically, that's what you and I are creating. Is we're creating a judiciary, or at least we're creating the intellectuals that will produce the criteria for a judiciary that is yet to emerge. So when we talk about autostocracy, there's a place for autists, the division of labor. It isn't necessarily at the symbolic head, because you want, you're basically looking for a healthy family that represents the moral and familial ambitions of the nation. Kingston, this is just the cycle of civilization. Well, this is true, except that there isn't anything deterministic about that. We've had a lot of people, Quigley being the best, talk about the evolution of civilizations. And Quigley's probably the closest to any of them. But the West has reformed over and over and over again without collapsing. And so we have in an English method of the constitutional law, the legal method. In other words, when you replace people, that's very, people in networks of families, that's very different from replacing laws. So we just get really good at replacing laws, and sometimes chopping off the heads of kings. And this process works really elegantly, actually. It's a hyper-adaptive model. And so when you say it's a cycle of civilization, I just consider it as the natural step function of evolution. Not all civilizations have to collapse. If you look at, most of them they do, but most of them they do for reasons we've explained. And those reasons that we've explained tend mostly to have to be the insufficiency of markets. Simon directly poses a good question. The problematic trait in men was aggression, and hanging selected it out. What can really be selected out of women? Shit, that's a really good question. Well, we know it actually will work. No, it'll work you have to take it off. The difference is you have to take it off the bottom, right? You have to, that'll naturally occur, because we're talking about the dysfunctional women, which is quite a few of them, but they're just as evenly distributed as dysfunctional men. But the bad ones appear to mostly be at the bottom. But just like every other trait, accumulates. In other words, comorbidity of bad traits is shifted to the bottom, and it has to be. So I think that'll solve the problem. I think you're right, though. You've identified a really good research question. How do we select it out of women? Well, I'm not sure if it isn't just as easily. In other words, we don't. That's a really good thing. We got to talk about that. That's a good thing. Let me do some work on that and then think about that. But it seems to me that's a solvable problem, because it isn't clear that we needed to keep hanging men once we developed an economy able to make use of them. In other words, the number of men getting hanged today is, we could vastly increase it, but it's just not that big a number, right? You put them in jail and whatever, and you take them out of the gene pool. It's great. I think it would be more important to say that it's pretty easy if a woman can't behave, it's easier to take her out of the gene pool. But that's a different thing than men. And I think women are slightly more easily socially constrained than men. I have to think about it. That's me thinking off the top of my head. Russia is going in the opposite. Is it David, or I don't know, somebody with a funny name? Russia is going the opposite direction. No will, no reason, demanding. Putin's. I've said this the other day. Putin's making a bet. He's making a bet that we're going to fall apart from this new woke whatever. In other words, we're going to have our Bolshevik revolution and collapse before Russia hits its demographic and strategic power collapse. And I don't know anybody who thinks that's wrong. And so from his perspective, he's just maintaining his strategic capacity long enough until he can act to restore what he considers the trade routes and territories necessary to restore the population, demographics, trade cycles of the Russian people. I don't think it's nothing. Putin never does anything that doesn't make perfect sense to me, just like Trump never did anything. I mean, everything Trump did makes perfect sense to me. You just have to understand their incentives and their objectives. John asks, yes, is it possible to artificially create a selection pressure against the genotype that requires faith? I'm not sure we want to, but what you mean is fundamentalism. There's a difference between faith and fundamentalism. I mean, I have faith, right? I'm not a fundamentalist. I have an esoteric concept of God, right? Which any theological person would say, well, that's not God. That's what God is to me. But fundamentally, I'm a deist, right? The universe is God. And so God is an anthropomorphization or anthropomorphization, or even not that, an attribution of pattern to a thing that appears without pattern. So I mean, I don't think that's necessary. But if you haven't seen that video, which will terrify the shit out of you, because it did to me, and it's the one thing that made me go just flip my bid on Gates. You see the video where he's pitching to the Department of Defense how to put a flu together that can be spread, that will do a CRISPR effect on the primary gene that seems to affect hyper-religiosity we call fundamentalism. So not only is it possible, not only do we know it, there's a group of people who've done the science to make it happen. So yeah, but it's like, there's like, there are things that you want to cure. Like, I mean, if you could find a gene that would, you can end the cystic fibrosis problem. You can end, many of these other, some of these hypersensitive immunity disorders. If you could find a set of 100 genes that would, normalize differences in personality traits away from the extremes. There's all sorts of things. I'd love to have been 6 feet tall. If you could manage all these, I'd probably be an even bigger dick than I am now. But anyway, these, there's things you can do. There's also, the problem is there's unintended consequences to every one of these modifications. And I'm not really sure what the unintended consequence to eradication of fundamentalism is. Fundamentalism essentially, it turns out to be an addiction response in the OCD family. So you're basically, doing somewhat what an autistic does, except you're doing it empathic. You're doing it to justify an empathic response rather than the absence of an empathic response. So did I? Yeah, exactly. Martin says genotype alone doesn't require faith. There's a religiosity. Well, the primary need for religiosity is indoctrination. If we took away indoctrination, what happens is there's a need for mindfulness. And so when we talk about the need for religion, the need for mindfulness is real. The need for producing mindfulness through narrative, norms, traditions, oaths, festivals, those things we all understand. They're just forms of training, just like lifting weights, except you're doing it for your emotional intuition. That's fine. But to say that you need to have the supernatural it's just evidently false. There are plenty of ways of doing it. It's just a cheap way to manipulate people and then seek rents off them by priests. I mean, it's a great scam, which is why, of course, the Byzantines did their sort of evil with it, and which is really what the Muslims repelled against, right? The Arabs rebelled against the institutionalization of Roman law over their traditional law. And like I say, law is more important than religion. Once you understand that everybody lives by law and bullshits by religion, that doesn't mean it's not important to them, but they live by law. That was it. If that was a video by Gates and it was a hoax, that's great. It scared the shit out of me because I believe it's, I can see it being possible. Anyway, and I just, if I got caught by that video, I just points off to the guys who did it because it fucking fooled me. Did I get that? So genotype doesn't alone. So the female method of undermining, in other words, the females have a higher empathic rate. In other words, the cognitively females. Universally almost means females, but some males are cognitively female. And that is amplified by the tendency for women to be more neurotic, especially at the extremes, which means they worry more. So you have this incredible uncertainty with a biological creature that was designed to worry about all these offspring. You're giving it empathy so that it can, neurosis, neurotic intuition, worrying intuition, so that it will continue to do so regardless of how ridiculous it sounds. That evolution did that on purpose. So that the question is, women are more drawn to religion because they have more need for mindfulness. The question is only how we provide it. Well, it's just really easy in a multi-generational family in a multi-generational house to produce that, and especially if it's around other people with a multi-generational family, the multi-generational house that are participating in a high trust society under rule of law where you have truth and duty and all this other stuff. So there's just a limited number of frictions to do otherwise. So it makes perfect sense. So there's a demand for mindfulness. What we call religion is just one of the ways of producing it. And it's a pretty good way of doing it because it's just hyper-socialization through hyper ritual, the process of which eliminates all the status conflict while we're doing it. Just think of it as all it is when you're always in a status hierarchy, always competing, and you go to this place, this temple, right? Which is where we used to go to, and you're putting away not only your weapons, not only your physical weapons, not only your verbal weapons, but your status weapon. And of the weapons you're putting away, status is the one that causes the most anxiety. So, in a group of neurotic people. So, religion works. You just don't have to produce it that way. Look at the difference between the mental health of women who play sports and women who don't. Sports does a pretty good job. Well, so does any socialized activity with a set of rules that bind our behavior. And if those, and the one thing about sports is it's basically moral. It's the same thing. It's just a physical expression of a moral ideal. Smith. I don't know how to answer the question about boxing. As someone who has taken some boxing lessons recently, my asthma is too far advanced to do the footwork. I mean, I really need to take somebody out in the first 15 seconds. It's not that I don't know how to do it. I just die. I think that that the judiciary is not, that my statement about sports is true, and it would be good to play a sport before being on the judiciary. But in general, we can test people as they can make judicial decisions. It has way more to do with just not being agreeable than anything else. Kingston asks, have you heard of mold bugs? Of course, I use it all the time. I use the cathedral all the time. My argument is that mold bug and I are great examples of Jewish and Christian or European argument. His argument consists largely of critique, and my argument consists largely of solution. If you look at his solution, it's pretty ridiculous, and of course, it's just another version of positive law or positive rulership in the Jewish tradition. If you look at my solution, it's just another statement of martial hierarchy, feminine faith for the family, and commercial law for the cooperation among all. I mean, you can't get away from it. And like I said, he's a great example of the fact that cognition is, the feminine cognition is genetic in origin. Just masculine cognition is genetic, female cognition. And you almost can't find an exception. We can't find a single woman that thinks like a guy. I mean, the closest one we've got is, what's her name? God, Peterson did an interview with her. Gay, woman, feminist, absolutely fantastic. Escaping me. But even her, she's still obviously biologically female. I mean, when she's talking, you could get it. And this is in sentence structure. It's in subtle differences and biases. It's why men can tell if women wrote a novel, or women can tell if men wrote a novel. And it's when you and I look at some Hollywood characters, we can tell that some gay person wrote this, because no man would actually act like that. I mean, it's obvious. Wait a minute. Is it useful to see progressive as an emergent? No, it's just the feminine. It's just undermining. John asks, how did the underclass women cope under Romans when there wasn't Christianity? Well, go study Saturnalia. Go study other holidays. And there's a really clear class distinction, right? And so they had, we had this even, I mean, look up Jack and the Green, or the chimney sweepers. Look what they did in Europe. You sort of grant the peasantry license to be naughty, to turn the tables. But do a little quick read. Just do Wikipedia on Saturnalia, and then read a little bit on how Saturnalia was practiced. I mean, you're always licensing them. But we talk about this as if there was a lot of choice. Right? You're talking about we pay a huge cost to make the education and the biology of industrial civilization possible. And they just, I mean, we don't think of it this way, but Rome was still operating on animal and human power, and by today's standards, it was incredibly poor, right? I mean, there were very wealthy people, but compared to today, there's people who had far more power than any individual has today, plenty of them, right? But the wealth that the relative wealth they had, in other words, the caloric capacity of it, is trivial by comparison. Is it possible to return to the solution? John, I'm going to tell you, and I tell everybody as often as I can, stop looking at the past, because the whole period is over. We had the hunter-gatherer period, we had the agrarian period, and everything we can think back, everything we think about is from the agrarian period. It doesn't work anymore. We don't live in that world. We moved to a different planet with a different ecosystem, basically, and we're in a different planet with different people they're searching desperately for different customs, traditions, morals, ideas and whatever, and we're sort of sorting it out. And it seems to be happening is we're just returning to universal human form, which is that we're extended families from the family up to the race to the civilizations are just reflections of races, and that's all there is. And we just cooperate in the best of our interest because the demographic distribution of our races and our civilizations. Not very complicated. And I don't see that as very complicated. What I see is people not appreciating Pax Romana or Pax Americana. Because if people understood what would happen to them in the absence of Pax Romana or Pax Americana or Pax Britannia, they would say, "Holy shit, I don't give a shit. Don't make me go there." But the problem is you can't tell them that's going to happen and have them believe it. They have to experience their decline in order to long for the past. I think what you did ask is it possible to return to what the Romans had? I would say that the Romans better understood the economy because they better understood man than us. So you had a slave economy, a serf economy, a peasant economy, a soldiery economy, a freeman economy, a citizen economy, and a sovereign economy. And this was a meritocratic hierarchy that you could gain additional influence and privilege as you demonstrated competency to manage the capital at that level of abstraction, the level of the hierarchy. So, in the sense that I look at the Romans, what do I learn is, they're masters of administration. There's nothing like them, and there's no equivalent to them at all. People bring up China. I'm like, no. So Roman administration is like Prussian administration. It's fucking amazing. What we did during the Enlightenment, as well as false promise of equality, is we threw everybody into the meat grinder of the market instead of maintaining a set of economies that people could graciously climb and graciously fail into. If we did that, then we could measure it and regulate these things. But this utopianism that the French invented, just a fucking catastrophe. And then Marx went along and justified it. And then we've just had one reformation of French Judaism, Marxism, postmodern, all the way up to the present until they've just learned, just like any subsystem of warfare, they've just gotten, just like we got better at warfare as we fight, right? They get better at warfare as they fight. So they just increase their capacity to conduct warfare against the institutions of cultural production as their time, and it's because we didn't stop them. This is why the Western premise that you fight all wars early is so important. It's why intolerance is so important. Social intolerance is so important. Is you want to capture things while they're cheap, and rather than when they're expensive. And the viability of gray goose scenario. Well, I don't agree. I don't know which one that is. I think if you mean the viability of the evolution of the cellular wall and the development of cells, I think that's. We're at the point where we know what happened. We just got to reconstruct it. I don't think that was a mystery before. I don't think that's a mystery any longer. It's just, we know enough now to say, well, the physics of this sort of mandates that this sequence will eventually happen. So I don't think that's it. I don't know what the gray goo. So if somebody wants to say what gray goo is in the comments, I'll try to answer it. Are you familiar with Bill Gates' rational physics? I haven't. I've heard his name, though. I'll take a look at it. Anybody who's trying to combat mathiness with real physics, the mathematical pseudoscience sort of applied to the physical world with real pseudoscience. And anybody who's willing to help me overturn the Einsteinian and Bohrian counter-revolution against mathematics, I'm happy to help. But I've seen the name, but I haven't looked at it. I get very disappointed when I work with these people because it's generally they find one answer, they find one correct thing, but they extrapolate it to where it isn't. There's another guy I've been working on the past couple of weeks whose fundamental insight at the bottom level is quite correct. I mean, it's obviously correct, but he gets to the point where he's making claims that I'm like, we need something to go by, buddy, because right there, that's just a hard one. All right, so I think we're out of questions. I don't think anybody's got anything else. Okay. Oh, gray goo is a catastrophic scenario involving artificial replicators forming the goo. I don't know what that, I'd have to look more into what they're talking about, in the sense that, is there any reason bacteria or viruses wouldn't win? And the answer is no. There's no reason. We've known for decades how to exterminate mankind biologically. It's just non-trivial, and even if you started to try to the program, enough people would know that it would get out. Gray goo was referring to a transhumanist doomsday scenario of sorts. Von Neumann nano machines turned out to be a dead end, right? They just, somebody said the other day, all that happens when you invent a new term and that can get funding is everybody turns anything can vaguely cast of it as nano, and there's no nano, nothing. There's nothing. The reason is energy conversion. The options for energy conversion in that frame are too small. So the only nano that we know of is what we think of as chemistry, and biochemistry is perhaps the best. So their nanobots, as far as I know, are already a dead end. If there's anybody that says otherwise, I'd like to see them. But I mean, we've got to the equivalent of cute little kids' toys, and there's no means of storing energy at that level. In other words, the mass and complexity necessary for each incremental storage and transformation of energy is somewhat difficult to produce, and there's not enough mass there to do that. John says, after learning about first principles, everything made sense. The floodgates of understanding open up. Thank you for this. I used to be an angry person, but I'm gone now. I wonder. I think one thing I want to comment on, John, is that it did the same for me. And I'm hoping that, and this is the reason for this chat I've started, I'm hoping that the rest of my anger will dissipate and that I'll live a little longer. Although I might have to go live on an island in order to make that happen. But yeah, hoping this will get there. You did say one thing that was pretty interesting, is that I'm such an idiot. Sometimes it's just like some things are so obvious, I don't state them, and I realize that that's a key that helps everybody. And so when I said paradigm, vocabulary, logic, and grammar, right? Well, implicit in that is the paradigm is first principles. Well, but it makes a whole big difference if you say, well, I start with, it's a paradigm consisting of first principles expressed into vocabulary and grammar, right? So I draw attention to the first principles, which is the whole issue, is that P-law helps us is what is reducible to first principle. That's what we do, is we produce first principles at every level of abstraction possible. So that's really the major issue there, is that I put it first principles. Once I sort of got there, was like, this is another one of those things. I just feel so stupid. I work at this problem so hard, and it's sitting there staring me in the face. And then I realize what the issue is. And then, of course, I go to it because, of course, it's not organized this way in my head. So just starting with first principles and working up. I mean, we've had a talk on this in the past. Some of the other guys, is that if you start with the first principles and work your way up, the first principle of the universe, which is the triangular capture of energy that I just talked about. Well, I mean, you talk about that first principle and you illustrate it at every level of abstraction through every phase, including the psychological and social sciences. You end up with saying, well, there's just one underlying principle here. which is evolutionary calculation, or computation, and that's it. That's all that's going on. And the division of the way we divide up the energy, the evolutionary computation, and the equal sign that emerges from evolutionary computation is cooperation that produces increases in energy transformation and capital. Well, that's the formula. There's nothing else. There's nothing else to know. It's so obvious, it's painful. And then it's just enumerating all the applications so people don't have to do the work of deduction themselves. Then when you get to our law, I've got our law down to, Peterson did a beautiful job. He says, well, sovereignty, it's really just sovereignty, individual sovereignty. Well, that is it. But of course, individual sovereignty requires that we make it possible. In other words, he's stating a fact without stating how do you bring it into being, which is the operationalization of individual sovereignty is only possible by certain means and produces only one kind of social organization, which is our founding principle. So we discovered that one thing. Yeah, but that doesn't take me very long, and a person can understand that in a couple of paragraphs. And then I'm just stuck with enumerating all these rules of human behavior, and then the basics, what's necessary to what basic rights, obligations, and alienations are necessary for us to be able to create a rule of law under that, and what government best assists the calculation using it, and then what policies would that lead us to today to reform, given that that's the circumstance. So, it's just science mankind. So it's just it's good. So the emphasis of first principles, thank you for bringing it up, is just pretty important. I just feel stupid for not starting there. Stomac says, I didn't know that. That answers the question anyway. Thanks, Kurt. I'm not sure what that's referred to. Oh, gray goo. Okay. I see. Well, yeah, first principles makes a big difference. And, it's like, when you work with, I would say it's just, I started out when, Martin probably remembers this, I started out with geometry because I thought I would teach people through geometry, in other words, through analogy to geometry. And this is like another one of my things, right? I started out with language. That's too hard. I started with geometry. That's too hard. Well, you get down to first principles, it turns out to be pretty easy. But, when you're working with geometry, you have just a small number of tools to work with, largely triangles. Well, I'm saying this triangle is the same thing you measure all social behavioral science with. It's the same thing because it's all the world has to work with. If you learn enough about the physical world, you realize that the most complex thing it can work with is a triangle. That's the most sophisticated unit the universe can work with. And so everything's going to result in some expression of triangles. So, just once you see that, it's just, okay, well, the universe is triangular. Okay, I get it. All right, so have I killed off everybody now? Has everybody nothing else left? I can go home. What am I going to do today? I remember, of course, the course still just has that and a bit of neurology. Well, we're going to have a lot of fun with that, Martin. All right. Therapy for me. Can I impose upon you for some therapy? John, my work is somewhat hard to translate, but I think you're thinking about where I am, right? I want the work done. Once I have the work done, I want a possibility for Martin and Luke and if Brandon, I want these guys to be able to teach it, right? I need to get to there because then if anything happens to me, I feel I'm okay. That's my goal. My life is extremely, most of you know, and the more translations we get, the better. The problem is, again, you need to understand it to translate it because it's non-trivial. English is a certain kind of language. It's a high precision, low context language with this enormous vocabulary that I've exploited to turn into systems of measurement for various reasons, mostly because, English consists of the unification of at least three languages: Germanic, French, and Greek, Latin, and Greek. And so you have this combination of terms, and so these are just it's a class system, right? So the language follows the class system, but because of that, there's just these overlapping terms that are available, and they've over time evolved into having slightly different meanings. So it's just easier to disambiguate that language into something. So yeah, I suppose we want to do that. And honestly, guys, I'm just so fucking close. I'm just so close to having it, and my this personal stress I'm under is just it's making me want to jump out the window. Seriously, it's just fucking horrible. Um, Stomac, chat with Martin. As far as I know, Martin maintains a presence on Telegram, and that's the best. I mean, that's the most active group with the best people that I know of. I'm finding a position where I feel more comfortable doing this because I feel done with the work, and so I feel a little more comfortable doing this. But really, Martin handles the discords, and Brandon handles the, who's good to talk to me. And I have a bunch of other people that make sure I don't lose my mind. And I sort of think of as Dr. Brad now is not too different from my fitness person. It's just trying to make sure I show up and do the exercises. So I think I have people take care of me, but honestly, my life has gone from being painful, almost unbearable, taking care of my mother, to still pretty difficult. And it's only because I need to be around better people. I just need to be around. I need all this stuff to go away for me to be able to work with you folks, because I love you. I do. I love all of you. I don't know how to get a conversation with Dugan. You got to remember how much of I'm like a third rail in the geekosphere, right? Because I talk about all these taboos. I attack religion. I attack the right. I attack Nazis. There's no room for Jeffersonian anymore. So, so I'm a mess, and I just I just need some good friends to be around. To Dugan. So if I would love to talk to him, to talk about how we make the future of the Russian people secure. And I know he's not an idiot, right? I mean, he knows what he's doing. He speaks in a frame on purpose. He can move between them. So the only barrier is the language barrier. But I didn't understand him at all at first, and now he makes perfect sense. It's because I follow him on the Russian equivalent of Facebook. And so I would love to talk to Dugan in order to see if I can figure out how to bring that about. Because the real difference, of course, is our success at rule of law and their success at maintaining traditional culture. And and their tradition of maintaining masculinity and femininity. Miss B. Smith, don't tempt me, because I would love to be under adult supervision long enough to finish my book, because I'm so fucking close. Anyway, so that's my position. I can't. I've gotten past finding any value talking to Zizek. I just love him, right? It's just a goofball human being. But Dugan would be useful. I can't. There's nobody else. There's really aren't any intellectuals, right? I mean, there just aren't any. It's frustrating. John asks, what does it say, Simon? Translating it into lesser languages would be a pain in the ass. Yeah, but there's people who are good at this. I mean, Martin could translate this into Czech, and it would be no problem at all, right? I mean, I wish I could go to. Because the problem is I'm getting older. Love to go to Germany, live in Germany, figure how to science German culture, put that in and then see if I could write my work in German. That would be really fun for me. That's not going to happen. John asks, did Dr. Brad take his first step into the abyss yet? It's very hard to tell what he really thinks, and it's useful, like any psychologist, is to not let the patient know what you think, or any professor, really, for that matter. And so he is mostly concerned, as far as I know, about how do you make us successful? I'm more comfortable saying, if I do my job, I don't fucking care. I mean, if I did my job, I did my duty. I want to go take a nap and watch pretty girls and catch fish, right? So he's more interested in that. I'm only interested in it if it doesn't mean beating my head against a wall with idiots. So I'm very tired of idiots. I'm more tired than I used to be. So it's like I just had a thing with I don't want to bring him up again. So anyway, he's got there. So I think when I hear him, he's not trying to be a Christian apologist. He's trying to be a Christian utilitarian. And I'm like, I'm not going to do what the past has done. I'm not going to leave open the door. So I've found a way for Christianity, and if that way is fine, then that's good, and it's not. So has he stayed in the abyss? He's pretty persistent, and I think in his mind, he thinks he can get me there. He's gotten me this far, so maybe he can. I don't know. Yeah, Swedish. I love the sound of Swedish. I don't think I could learn it, though. It's just languages were easy for me when I was young, but they've gotten increasingly harder. I mean, my problem with Russian Ukrainian was obvious to me in my 50s. All right, anything else? Because we've been on now for an hour and 16 minutes. Otherwise, if I haven't got any other questions, I'll go on. I want to thank you for providing this therapy session for me. and your company is always enjoyed, and it's something that's meaningful to me. So take care. I really appreciate your time and attention. God bless. Bye-bye.